Welcome back to IAS Net Study. This is the ethics series, and in this ethics series, this video is 33rd video. We were discussing moral philosophy, the fifth unit. In the last video, we were discussing Indian philosophy, Eastern philosophies, and mainly focusing on Indian philosophies. And there we talked about features of Indian philosophy. Then we talked about Hinduism and the Buddhism, and we saw the moral core ideologies in Hinduism and the Buddhism. Now, let us continue the discussion on Indian philosophy. So let's talk about Jainism, and then we are going to talk about Sikhism, and then Islam, Sufism, also, and at the end we are going to talk about Bhakti tradition, and also the saints, also important saints related to Bhakti tradition. So let's get into the discussion of this. Let's start with Jainism. Jainism, what is the core philosophy? The core philosophy of Jainism talks about universal welfare. What is this concept of universal welfare? Usually, if you look at the Western philosophies, the welfare or the goodness, it is related to human connection. But here, Jainism, it goes beyond that factor of human being. It includes all the living entities. If you get into the core analysis, even at some parts, even the non-living entities are also included in that concept. Here, mainly, all living beings are included here. So universal welfare, and all living beings includes animal, also animal welfare, plants also. So it says that all these living entities, they all possess souls somewhere. If you understand this philosophy, the concept of universal welfare, it links to equality, it links to acceptance, it links to tolerance, it links to inclusivity. See, these are some of the important philosophical concepts or philosophical ethos, ethical ethos you can derive out of Jainism here. See, ultimate aim of the Jainism, obviously there is a religious connection to it and spiritual aspect to it. So ultimate aim is the liberation, moksha. So in order to have a liberation, you need to have a self-realization. Sorry for my handwriting. Self-realization. Same thing in Hinduism, same thing in Buddhism. Self-realization, and self-realization leads to moksha, nirvana. This is what. And the journey towards the self-realization, this makes you moral, this makes you ethical, and this journey tells you what to do and what not to do, and this journey tells you what are the ethical considerations you should keep in mind whenever there is a decision making, whenever you have to take an action. So in these kind of circumstances, moral guidelines come into the picture to reach that self realization. Now let's see from a Jainism perspective, the teachings of Jainism perspective. When you understand the teachings of Jainism perspective, you can derive more moral concepts from it. So if you look at the core principles, it is called three jewels. It's also called three ratnas. The first is right faith. Right faith, samyak darshan. Right faith. Here, faith is on truth. There is a respect, there is a reverence on truth. So if your faith is right, it is linked to knowledge. So when you have respect to truth, when there is a reverence to truth, it will lead to the right knowledge, that is samyak gyan. So when you have the right knowledge, with the right knowledge, you can, it is ensured your conduct will be right. This is what even the Socrates also initially he told that knowledge is the base of your moral behavior. If you have knowledge, all other attributes, all other positive values are dependent on knowledge. Knowledge is like a base. On top of it, rest of the attitudes usually they derive out of the knowledge. Somewhere whatever he said here also, you can link it to it. See, Jainism, it is way beyond, way before whatever Socrates expressed. But here I am trying to connect the uh, dots here, whatever they told, and whatever the Western philosophy and the Eastern philosophy. So right faith, it leads to the right knowledge. When you have the right knowledge, your conduct will be correct. So whatever the actions you do, whatever the decisions you make, it will be correct, it will be ethical, it will be moral. So right conduct, it is samyak charitra. So acting in accordance with faith and knowledge. So here practice is essential to discipline. Practice is also the, Plato told that it is not only the knowledge, it is also the conduct, it is also the action. So the Plato, he mentioned about it, knowledge plus action. So here also, right faith leads to right knowledge, and right knowledge ensure your conduct is ethical. So these are the core principles of Jainism. And let's talk about the Mahavratas. are called great vows of Jainism. There are 5 important great vows, and out of these 5, the more important, the predominant focus in the Jainism is ahimsa, that is non-violence. So that is the principle. Again, all these Mahavratas, whatever we are, the great vows we are talking about, again, these are all moral guidelines that you are supposed to follow. Being a Jain, you are supposed to follow all these things. In turn, if you are following, it means that there is an ethical imprint in your life cycle. So one is non-violence, and another one is satya, that is truth, and non-stealing, asteya, aparigraha, it is non-possessiveness, brahmacharya, celibacy or chastity. So these are some of the great vows you have to take being a Jain. So somewhere these are called right, when you have the right knowledge, and in that right knowledge gives you right conduct. And if you inculcate these things, if you adhere these principles in your right conduct, eventually this will help you to reach self realization, and eventually this will get you moksha. So this is how the journey is. So initially, three ratnas: right faith, right knowledge, right conduct, and the great vows: non-violence, truthfulness, non-stealing, non-possessiveness, and the celibacy. Now, path to liberation: liberation is achieved by eliminating karma. See, when we were discussing about what are the features of Indian philosophy, there I talked about one point, that is, in the Western philosophy, the ultimate goal is happiness, but here in the Eastern philosophy, ultimate goal is self-realization. So here self-realization happens, it is transcending good and bad, it is transcending evil and the right, it is transcending morality and immorality. So it is beyond that. It is not only positive karmas, it is also the, sorry, it is not only eliminating positive karmas. First you eliminate the positive karma, then you control your karma altogether, whatever your actions, whatever your conduct. On the whole, it is eliminating karma. And how do you do it? Even the path is also explained here, the way to achieve this is also explained here, through the disciplined life. And by controlling various aspects, like your various emotions like anger, greed, pride, delusions. See, initially what happens, you remove negative attributes from your life. Once you control your, remove your negative attribute, this kind of negative value system, then you focus on developing positives, and eventually you remove this positive uh, karmic actions also, you transcend good and bad. So initially the first step is to remove the negative conduct from your behavioral pattern. So initially, how do you how exactly these negative patterns manifested in your life? Through your negative emotions. So directly, if you look at the Jainism, it is directly focusing on your negative emotions: anger, greed, these are the negative emotions, negative attributes. Once these things are eliminated from your behavioral pattern, then comes the positive, so enforcement of positive attitude, and eventually you're going to transcend karmic pattern also. So this is the, and eventually that will lead to the moksha. So this is the path of liberation. Again, the 5 abstinence, while non-violence, all these things. Abstinence means you have to avoid, or you should not involve in these 5 things. What are these? Violence, lying, stealing, attachment, and sexual misconduct. So once you avoid all these things, it, these are guidance for your moral conduct, these are guidance for your right conduct, these are guidance for your ethical conduct. So ultimately, if you look at the key ideas, it, look at the Jainism ethics, it combines faith, knowledge, discipline, practice. Aim is the spiritual purification. Your body is getting purified, your mind is getting purified. This is what the Jainism philosophy believes in. But in turn, it is ensuring ethical conduct, it is ensuring moral considerations in your actions. All these non-violence, uh, non-possessiveness, not stealing, all these kind, these are the ethical guidelines or moral considerations for your conduct. So ultimately, this will lead to the liberation, this will lead to the moksha. This is the understanding. This is with respect to Jainism. Here, what you have to focus are the moral concepts given by the Jainism. Even there was a question in the UPSC mains. They asked about the moral. I don't remember the exact question, but the question is related to what are the moral attributes you derive out of the Jainism, or what are the teachings of Jainism, how exactly the moral teachings are there in Jainism. Some are, this is like this. So where you have to mention all these things initially, universal welfare, and you have to talk about self-realization. That is the goal here. And how do you achieve this? The path to achieve the self-realization also, and the three core principle, how exactly these three core principles are going to influence your moral conduct. And then you talk about five great vows, and how exactly these five vows or the mahavratas, how these vows are linked to the ethical behavior at individual level, ethical behavior at the social level. That is where you have to connect it. And some, if you could able to give an example, that is well and good. And finally give a proper conclusion. So this is with respect to Jainism. Let's move to the next discussion. Next discussion is with respect to Sikhism. Sikhism, it is founded by Guru Nanak, and you know the Sikhism has emerged in the location between the where one side Islam was dominant, another side Hinduism was dominant. So the combination, the influence of Islam and the Hinduism, it is very much visible in the practices of Sikhism. The combination and the culmination of good things, positive things from both the sides have been taken, and there emerged a new practice here, and it emphasizes ethical living. It emphasizes on truth. It emphasizes on honesty and kindness, and it promotes harmony. This is another factor. Even the historical arrangements or the geographical location, that also wanted some kind of social harmony in this location. And these kind of social harmony, religious harmony, is also one among the core philosophy of Sikhism. It promotes harmony among all the communities. And what are the principles? Again, the philosophy of whether it is Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, whatever the guidelines or spiritual guidelines these belief systems have, it is fine. But at the same time, you have to link it to the moral consideration or moral philosophy here. So, principles of Sikhism, and let's connect it to the morality factor. The truth. Again, truth is one of the positive attributes. So here also Sikhism also emphasizes on the truth, and truth is important for spiritual progress according to the religious doctrine. But even for your conduct, truth, especially from a moral consideration, truth, honesty, sincerity, these have a highest regard in our day-to-day activities. Again, from the religious perspective, religious doctrine also emphasis on truth, and even from the ethical consideration also there is an emphasis on the truth. So spiritual progress comes through the adherence to the truth and acceptance of God's will, destiny, that is. And control of vices. Even the Jainism also, I told you that initially we need to eliminate negative attributes, then we are going to develop positive attributes, and eventually this will lead to the self-realization. And once you have a self-realization, it is liberation, moksha. This is what happens. And here also it starts with controlling your negative attributes, controlling of vices. What are these controlling vices? Lust, wrath, greed, attachment, ego. These must be controlled. And how do you control it? Even the practice also mentioned in the Eastern philosophy, that is through self-discipline, poise, and balance rather than penance. So you control all these things, and the practical method to control these negative attributes also been given in the Sikhism also. It has been given in the Jainism, Buddhism, Hinduism also. Even in the Sikhism, the practice, how do you control that aspect, the practical aspect also being given here. And some of the virtues are celebrated in Sikhism. And what are these virtues? It talks about wisdom, truthfulness, justice, temperance, courage, humility, contentment, and love for humanity. Again, tolerance, inclusivity, all these things you can write it. And these are some of the values or virtues we derive from Sikhism. So, if you look at the principles of Sikhism, these are the principles. And what do you derive out of this principle? The last line you can include it in your answer. And then what are the duties of a Sikh? Here, duties from a spiritual or a religious aspect, here they have mentioned it, but you need to connect it with a moral concept also, ethical considerations also. So here it talks about right belief. Right belief, even though it is talking about one God, it means right belief you can connect it with a knowledge, right knowledge, ethical knowledge, moral knowledge. And then right livelihood, it talks about earning honestly and helping the needy. And it talks about chastity and fidelity, ethical behavior in personal life, in family life. When I am ethical in my personal life, this is going to be replicated in my family life, and it is eventually going to be replicated at the professional and the social life also. So this is where, at personal level, in my thought process, if I am ethical, and that is going to be replicated at the family level, at the community level, at the professional level. So here, so it is focusing on the morals and ethical standards of an individual being, and respect for life and women, the gender equality, all these aspects, the unequal concept, discrimination, gender discrimination, even those aspects are also being addressed by Sikhism here. So ultimately, by respecting life and women, what are we focusing on? We are focusing on dignity of an individual. The If you look at the Immanuel Kant, he talked about uh, categorical imperative, where dignity is one among the core concept. And here also, dignity of an individual, you're not supposed to compromise. Here also, respect for the life and women is there, so it upholds dignity, and it upholds compassion also. And seva is another important, very important aspects of Sikhism. It means service to the others. So here, service to the others, it means that selfless contribution. You are not expecting anything. You do your seva, but in turn you are not expecting anything. So this kind of altruistic attitude, this is also altruism, is also, or a helping nature, these are all considered as a positive attributes, and it ensures right conduct. And let's move on to the next. I think this would be sufficient with respect to Sikhism, and let's move on to the next belief system, Islam here. And the core philosophy is that it emphasizes on a discipline of mind and moral excellence. See, if you look at the virtues of Islam, it talks about goodness, sincerity, honesty, and sympathy. And let's see the core principle. One of the core principles of Islam is the universal brotherhood. The brotherhood, it is that universal human solidarity and ethical treatment of others. And another aspect you need to mention is the Sharia, the Islamic law. Sharia, it is a ethical guideline for my personal conduct. It is an ethical guideline for the social conduct. It is an ethical guideline for religious conduct also. So in those ethical conducts, it talks about my family duty, my marital duties, and it talks about even at personal level the inheritance, property of right, all these things. But here it mainly focuses on your relationship with the community and your responsibility and your commitment, your duties. What are you supposed to do from a community perspective? That aspect is going to be emphasized. That aspect is emphasized here. And you have certain duties to the state, neighbor, society. You have to fulfill these things. And you have religious duties like uh, these here, shahada, salat, zakat, all these things. The religious duties also, social duties, personal duties, community duties, religious duties, all these things have been mentioned under the Sharia law. So core principles, brotherhood, and the ethical guidelines for personal, social, and religious life. And within the Islam, we have a Sufism also. It is also Islamic mysticism, also called as Islamic mysticism. And this is quite a liberal or reformed. Reforms are, you can see some kind of reforms under Sufism, but in the Islam it was quite strict. Reformations are uh, very much restricted there, but in the Sufism it is quite liberal, and some kind of reformation has been seen in the Sufism here. So it is called spiritual movement within the Islam, and it originated in Persia and spread to India around 11th century. Here, what are the moral aspects you have to focus? See, there was one question few years back in prelims where there was an question is with respect to, can you is it Sufism equivalent to a yogic tradition? That was the question, and three options were given. So somewhere you can link that the aspects of yogic tradition, that also, if there are any similarity, you can write it there also. So here, what are the ethical emphasis here? There is a love of God and humanity. The virtues, virtue of love, virtue of compassion, that we can see in the Sufism. So here, serving of humanity is considered as a serving God. And there is a aspect of self discipline and inner purity. And again, it focuses on internal moral and spiritual development rather only on external rituals. And it talks about practices also. It talks about meditation, it talks about prayer, it talks about fasting, charity, all these kind of things, by doing suppression of passions through ascetic practices. I think this would be sufficient with respect to Islam. And let's talk about Bhakti movement. It's a medieval time period. India saw the Bhakti movement, and it is a pan-India movement, and it mainly focused on a social reform and the spiritual awakening. Again, there is a religion aspect to it. The intention is the spiritual awakening, and there is a social reformation also. Even though they were talking about religion, they were talking about the God conduct. They were questioning rituals, the strict formalities. But in that journey of religious discussions, a lot of social information or the social knowledge, moral conduct, ethical philosophies have also been discussed at the public level, at the community level actually. Before that, it was these kind of philosophy, they were all restricted to very upper class elites, or in a language where day to day people conversation happens in those kind of languages. It was not possible, it was not happening. But after bhakti movement, the social reformations took place at the ground levels, and it aimed at reawakening of moral consciousness. And entire, if you look at the bhakti movements, and if you look individually, if you study about these saints, they promoted ethical and devotional life among the common people. And what are the key features of bhakti movement? The first is religious unity. See, within Hinduism also, a lot of lot of different sects were there, and lot of different practices, procedures were there, and there were kind of tussle, and there were kind of uh, intolerance, it was there at the ground level. So that was eliminated. They tried very hard to create religious university, and they were successful also. And even Islam was also entering Indian subcontinent, and there were kind of clashes were happening. So religious unity is one among the key features of bhakti movement. And then they talked about social reform also. Social reforms include caste based discrimination, gender based discrimination, and even social evils like sati. All these things were questioned, and they were all rejected by these saints. And they advocated for gender equality, upliftment for the marginalized sections. They questioned the practices which are oppressive in nature. And the positive aspect is these discussions were supported at the ground level. People also started questioning it. People followed these kind of spiritual and social reformation questions by supported these questions by bhakti saints. And again, there is a focus on spiritual aspects, so devotional focus is another key feature. It emphasized on a personal devotion. Even through the devotional focus on the devotion, what they were focusing, what they were questioning is, there were ritualistic obstacles were there, ritualistic practices were there at the ground level, and they were somewhere oppressive in nature, or they were somewhere discriminative in nature. And these bhakti saints questioned them, and the concept of devotion, concept of bhakti has given a different dimension. They've concept of bhakti has got a different dimension during this bhakti movement. And the next important aspect is that mass appeal. They connected to the people at the ground level, at the community level. People got connected to the idea of bhakti movement here. So it encouraged people of all social background, again the inclusive factor, all social background, to directly engage with spirituality without any priestly mediation. So uh, uh, the priestly domination, it has been questioned here actually. Their intermediary between god and the human, that was questioned, that was even eliminated to a very large extent during the bhakti movement. And if you look at the cultural impact, one thing, see, they were moving from one place to another place. The one culture of one region, it they helped to take this culture to the another region, and they could able to connect with local people in the local language. Before that, it was a Sanskrit. Most of the scriptures, or most of the literature, if you look at it, it was a Sanskrit or the Prakrit. These works were visible, and the local languages like Marathi, local languages like Tamil, Kannada, even literature. So many authors, they've contributed to the literature also by writing so many works in these local languages, and in turn people could also able to connect with these kind of literature. So there is a cultural impact also through the bhakti movement. So it helped develop composite in Indian culture, integrating diverse linguistic and religious communities. It fostered resistance against feudal oppression. Again, they questioned all these things and empowered people morally and spiritually. And what are the core principles of bhakti movement? Again, the equality, I told you that, equality of all humans before God, and devotion as a path to moral awakening. Again, they were talking about the spirituality, they were talking about the God, they were talking about spiritual awakening, but in that journey, they use the methodology of morality. So they questioned all these oppressive nature from the lens of moral conduct, and they reject the social hierarchy, the caste based discrimination. All these things were rejected. Now the basics we have understood. Now let's talk about some of the important bhakti saints at that period of time. See, what I'm going to do is, for Ramananda, Saint Ramananda, I'm going to give the template here. So what are the aspects? If question comes, if at all question comes, what are you supposed to write? And this template, you can use it for other saints also. Almost it is a similar, maybe the personal deity It differs from one person to another person, but ultimately if you look at the core philosophy, entire bhakti saints, they had a similar core philosophy, philosophical ideas, ethical ideas, you can replicate the same thing. So here Ramananda talked about universal access to the God. It is God is a personal being who cares for all and rewards devotion. So that discrimination between different class of the people, different sect of the people in the name of religion, or especially the restricting entry to the religious the structures, it was all questioned, and somewhere God has become a personal thing. So I don't need to go to a religious place to express my devotion. I can express my devotion in the place where I. So this is universal access to God, and devotion to God is open to all regardless of caste or social status. Then he talked about social reform. He rejected the caste distinctions and he promoted interdining among the different castes. And if you look at the few other saints at that time, they supported intercaste marriages, also intercaste dining. All these things are supported by these bhakti saints. And even the disciples, if you look at the disciples of Ramananda, he took disciples from all the castes, including marginalized and degraded castes also. And use of vernacular language, advocated using vernacular instead of Sanskrit. This is also kind of uh, social empowerment actually. Sanskrit, it was restricted to only certain sections of the elite population at that point of time who belongs to the particular community. But here the usage of vernacular language has changed the dimension here. So in the journey of the spiritual teaching and spiritual awakening, these spiritual teachings uh, got accessibility factor to the common people also, and humanized the concept of God. Saint Ramananda, see, he conceived God with human attributes. So the relationship between the man and God, it is personal and intimate, like master and servant, or lover or beloved. So the concept of God has a different idea here. You don't have to fear a God, you have to love a God. So that concept arises from a Ramananda. And then religious tolerance, he also, most of the bhakti saints, they talked about religious tolerance. Promoted equality between Hindus and Muslims. He emphasized that spirituality is personal regarding no external influence. And what are the significance? Ramananda's teaching democratized religious practices, promoted social equality, strengthened devotional culture in India. So see, this is a template. You can replicate the same thing with minor changes for other saints also. So let's very briefly talk about important saints of the Bhakti culture. Next, Kabir Das, and here the God, he believed in a formless God, and he actually believed in the practices of, he questioned, believed in practices of both Hindu and Islamic practices, and also he questioned both Hindu and Islamic practices. There were negatives also, he questioned that also. So here he believed that there is one formless God, and that God is beyond the rituals. And what are the ethical and social reforms we can derive out of the Kabir Das? He criticized ritualism, he criticized idol worship, and he criticized caste hierarchy also. He promoted honest living, compassion, and the devotion. These are some of the moral principles we can derive out of the Kabir Das. And he very predominantly, the important aspect you need to remember with respect to Kabir Das is the unity of Hindu and Muslims. So he told that religion of the heart, not external forms. And he advocated self-realization through devotion and ethical conduct. Ethical conduct, this is the important thing. So almost all the saints, they talked about the spiritual awakening. And when, if you want to have a spiritual awakening, so they talked about path also. What is, how exactly you're going to have a spiritual awakening? Through the discipline, through the ethical conduct, by through the moral knowledge. These are the ways they talked about to have a spiritual awakening. And next we talked about Tulsidas, and for Tulsidas, Lord Rama as a ideal deity, and he wrote the Ramcharitmanas, and especially used the vernacular, the language to create this masterpiece of Ramcharitmanas. And again, if you look at the works of Tulsidas, also ethical teachings and moral considerations are also predominantly we can see in the Ramcharitmanas also. Again, he emphasized on certain moral values, that is truth, duty, loyalty, and righteousness. And he, for him, it is the devotion is the path of liberation. Look at the initially Hinduism discussions, we told that there are three ways to liberation: Bhakti Marg, Jnana Marg, and the Karma Marg. And he focused on the Bhakti Marg, devotion as a path of liberation. And Mirabai, for Mirabai, it is Lord Krishna as a beloved. And if you look at the social and ethical reforms, devotion over social norms, because she is a woman, and you can imagine the level of restrictions were there at that period of time. He it shows the courage and it shows that commitment and conviction from the Mirabai to stand for her convictions. So from personal level also, so many positive attributes can derive out of her. And from social reforms also, she initiated a lot of social reforms. And she told that devotion over the social norm. Social norm, there are a lot of restrictions over there. She questioned all these things and ignored caste restrictions. And she, if you look at the core philosophy, ideology you derive out of the Mirabai, it is the love, humility, surrender to the God, and exemplified courage in standing by spiritual ideas against societal opposition. You know that being a woman, what should be the social outrage at that point of time against her. Next, Surdas, for Surdas, Krishna as a central figure. And if you look at the ethical and social reform, focused on devotional love and the moral living, ethical living. So these are the two social, ethical aspects. And he advocated simplicity, non-violence, and ethical conduct in his poetry. And then let's talk about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. For Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it is the Sri Krishna, focus on devotional ecstasy. And what are the social reforms he talked about, ethical conduct he talked about? He promoted bhakti through the congregational chanting, Sankirtan. Again, when you talk about congregational chanting, it is that belongingness, the sense of oneness. When everybody is coming together, it means that there is an acceptance factor, there is a factor of inclusivity, there is no restriction, no restriction of caste, gender, class, nothing. Everybody is coming together here. What matters, it is the devotion. But what you derive out of this concept of Sankirtan, equality, inclusivity, tolerance, acceptance, all these things can be derived out of it. The concept of oneness, we are all one entity, that concept can be emerged out of it. And he advocated equality among all the castes, especially through devotion, and he emphasized love, humanity, and selfless services. And if you look at the core ethical themes across the Bhakti saints, see these core ethical themes, these are the standard templates. You can use it in your answer. If the question comes regarding any saints, any Bhakti movement, questions regarding Bhakti movement, you can recreate these points in your examination. The first is equality. Almost all the Bhakti saints talk about equality. There is a lot of social restrictions were there, especially people belong to the backward sections or vulnerable sections at that point of time. So they talked about equality, the spiritual access to all. See, even though it is talking about spiritual access, they are talking about equality at the social level. And then another important is devotion. Through devotion, they were emphasizing love and compassion. So here, see, devotion, why they were emphasizing, there were ritualistic restrictions were there. They questioned these ritualistic restrictions, and in the name of devotion, we can see the social reform also. And if you look at the direct social reforms, what are the direct social reforms they involved in? They questioned the casteism, idol worship, social evils like sati. All these things were questioned by these Bhakti saints, and even to very large extent, the social reformations, people supported the social reformation. And since the people involvement were there, people support was there, even the ruling class, they could, um, if you look at so many geographical locations, even the kings at that point of time, they accepted the social reformations suggested by these Bhakti saints. And they talked about moral conduct, and moral conduct, very precisely, they talked about being truthful, they talked about honesty, they talked about compassion, non-violence is one of the important aspects. Truth and non-violence is the major aspects emphasized by the Bhakti saints. And even if you look at the Sikhism also emerged at that period, only 15th 16th century. That also they talked about the truthfulness, honesty, seva, these kind of positive attributes were inculcated in Sikhism also. And another important aspect is use of vernaculars. So to spread teaching, the local languages are utilized. By doing this, the accessibility factor to the common people has been uh, improved actually. So these are some of the aspects of Bhakti movement. So I think this is it. Yeah, this covers the fifth unit. So we are done with moral philosophy. In the next video, we are going to have a discussion in the next chapter, ethics and public administration. So after that, we have a probity chapter, last chapter. So we are going to finish it that very soon. And thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video, comment on the video. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good time.